On a random Tuesday in early 2026, a team of Disney animators finished a late-night meeting with OpenAI. They packed up their laptops, said their goodbyes. 30 minutes later, their phones rang. Sora was dead. The billion-dollar Disney deal gone. Just like that. One phone call. No warning. Imagine burning $15 million. Not over a year. Not over a month. While your product is quietly dying, your billion-dollar partnership is evaporating, and the people who were supposed to save your company are calling your CEO a sociopath. That is not a hypothetical. That is the actual story of Sora, OpenAI's most ambitious product launch ever. When it debuted, Sam Altman called it a Cambrian explosion of creativity, a new renaissance, product that would change everything. 1 million downloads in the first week. Top of the App Store. The entire world watching. Then it was gone. No press conference. No grand announcement. Just a quiet post that read, "We're saying goodbye to the Sora app. We know this news is disappointing." And what happened inside those 103 days, and what OpenAI did immediately after, should make every person paying attention to AI genuinely uncomfortable. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand not just why Sora died, but whether the entire AI revolution is starting to crack at the foundation. This is the full story, and it is genuinely wild. Chapter 1. The Promise. It's early 2024. Sam Altman, OpenAI's CEO and co-founder, one of the most powerful figures in Silicon Valley, stands in front of cameras and calls Sora something extraordinary. A Cambrian explosion of creativity. If you don't know the reference, the Cambrian explosion was the moment in Earth's history, roughly 540 million years ago, when almost every major animal life form appeared simultaneously. He was saying, "This changes everything." The demo videos OpenAI released alongside that announcement looked genuinely stunning. Ocean waves that moved like real water. City streets glowing with the warm gold of late afternoon sun. Characters moving, breathing, reacting, all generated from a single line of text. For its time, the footage was unlike anything the public had seen from an AI video tool. The internet went appropriately insane. No camera crew, no talent required. The idea was seductive. You record a short video of your face. You record your voice. You upload it. Sora generates videos starring you. 1 million iOS downloads in the 5 days. 1 million. It shot to the top of the App Store almost instantly. When the Android version dropped in November 2025, it pulled in 470,000 downloads on a single day. Sora looked like a rocket ship. But rockets, if they're not built correctly, don't reach orbit. Chapter 2. The Collapse. November 2025. Sora's peak month. 3.2 million downloads. Top of the charts. Glowing press coverage. But underneath those beautiful download numbers, something horrifying was happening. Look closer at the data. Really close. 90% of everyone who downloaded Sora quit within 24 hours. Not a week. Not a month. One day. By day 7, only 2% of users were still opening the app. By day 30, 1%. By day 60, the number was so close to zero it barely registered. Think about that for a second. Imagine filling a stadium with 1 million people who all came to watch the same show. By the time the curtain rises for the second act, 90,000 of them have already left. By intermission, only 20,000 remain. By the final scene, you're performing for 10,000 people in a venue built for 1 million. That is not a product with a growth problem. That is a product in freefall. The revenue numbers were even more brutal. In December 2025, Sora generated approximately $540,000 in monthly in-app revenue. That sounds reasonable for a new app until you learn what it costs to run. Every single video generated on Sora cost OpenAI roughly $1.30 in GPU computing expenses. At peak usage, with millions of users generating millions of videos, analyst estimates put those costs at up to $15 million in a single day. Over its entire lifespan, Sora generated approximately $2.1 million in total revenue. But even as the numbers collapsed, OpenAI had a card left to play. A big one. In December 2025, they announced a landmark licensing deal with Disney, one of the most recognized brands on the planet. Sora users would gain access to over 200 iconic Disney characters to use in their AI-generated videos. Felt like a lifeline. From Disney's headline-making announcement on December 11, 2025, to OpenAI's shutdown post on March 24, 2026, the lifeline lasted 103 days. That Monday evening in early 2026, the Disney team was still actively collaborating with OpenAI engineers on the project. They were in the room working, building something. 30 minutes after the meeting ended, the phone rang. Sora was being shut down. Immediately. No transition period. No wind-down plan. Disney pulled its investment entirely. And just like that, the app that had promised to change creativity forever was gone. But why? The money problems are obvious in hindsight. But the full story of why Sora failed is far more interesting and far more damning than simple bad economics. Chapter 3. 5 Reasons Sora Died. Reason 1. The math was catastrophic from day one. Generating video with AI is not like generating text. When you ask ChatGPT a question, the computing cost is relatively manageable. When you generate a 10-second video clip, rendering every frame, every pixel, every movement, the cost multiplies dramatically. Bill Peebles, who led the Sora team internally, reportedly acknowledged the economics were, in his own words, completely unsustainable. But it gets worse. Those GPUs Sora was burning through weren't just expensive. Sora wasn't just losing money. It was stealing resources from the rest of the company. For an organization projected to lose $14 billion in 2026 alone, despite crossing $20 billion in annual revenue, there was simply no room for this. Reason 2. Tourists are not customers. There's a trap that almost every viral AI product falls into. Analysts have a name for it. The novelty trap. Millions of people download the app. They try it. They generate a few videos, feel the dopamine hit of watching themselves star in an AI-generated action sequence. They show it to their friends. Their friends are impressed for about 45 seconds. Then everyone moves on. As one analyst described it, an AI tourist arrives, generates 50 images of a cat in a spacesuit, and gets their dopamine hit. After a week, they realize the 100th image brings no joy. Sora was built for tourists. It had no plan to turn them into residents. Curiosity does not pay subscription bills. Reason 3. Copyright was a legal landmine waiting to detonate. Within days of Sora's launch, the platform was flooded with AI-generated videos featuring copyrighted characters in deeply inappropriate situations. The Motion Picture Association issued a public demand within a week, calling on OpenAI to take what they called immediate and decisive action. OpenAI had initially set up an opt-out copyright system, meaning any character was fair game unless the rights holder specifically stepped in to block it. Under enormous pressure, they flipped overnight to an opt-in model, requiring explicit permission before any copyrighted character could appear in generated content. Legally, the right call. Strategically, catastrophic. The content that was driving viral sharing, the chaotic, creative, boundary-pushing videos that were making Sora feel alive, was stripped away almost immediately. The platform that had buzzed with energy became, almost overnight, a ghost town. And that was before the celebrity video platform called Cameo successfully obtained a temporary restraining order preventing OpenAI from using the same name. The Cameos feature became characters. The legal headache remained. Reason 4. The feature that was supposed to save it drove people away. Remember the pitch for Cameos, or characters as it was eventually renamed? Record your face. Record your voice. Let strangers remix your likeness for entertainment. In practice, a privacy nightmare that landed on users who had zero reason yet to trust the platform asking for their biometric data. Most people clicked away before finishing the consent screen. There's a fundamental law of social platforms. Friction kills engagement. TikTok works because it requires nothing from you except a scrolling thumb. The moment a platform asks users to work, to record themselves, to navigate complex privacy agreements, to trust a company they've known for 6 days with their biometric information, most people simply leave. Reason 5. OpenAI abandoned it from the inside. This is the one that cuts deepest. As 2025 turned to 2026, competition from Google and Anthropic was intensifying by the week. Sam Altman reportedly declared a company-wide state of emergency. Every resource, every GPU, every senior engineer redirected toward ChatGPT and enterprise products. The Sora team found itself stranded, starved of compute, losing top researchers to other divisions. The people who remained reportedly described themselves as second-class citizens within the company. Fidji Simo, OpenAI's head of applications, was direct with her staff. "We cannot miss this moment because we're distracted by side quests." Sora was the side quest. The app that Altman had called a Cambrian explosion of creativity, quietly reclassified as a distraction. Internally abandoned before it was publicly killed. And just when you think you understand what happened to Sora, there's something even stranger buried in what OpenAI did next. Something that raises questions about the entire direction of the company. Chapter 4. The Pivot and the Podcast. Within weeks of shutting down Sora, OpenAI announced a dramatic strategic realignment. The company renamed its entire product organization to AGI Development. It began aggressively targeting enterprise clients, trying to win back ground it had quietly been losing to Anthropic, whose Claude Code product had grown enterprise market share from 18% to 29% in 2025 alone. 8 of the Fortune 10 companies are now Anthropic customers. OpenAI, which had long coasted on the strength of its brand, was playing catch-up. But the enterprise pivot was only part of the story. The more dramatic move was the announcement that the Sora team was being reassigned to humanoid robotics research, specifically to something called world model research, building the foundational AI needed to power physical robots that can operate in the real world. To understand why that matters, you need to know something about OpenAI's origin story. When the company was founded in 2015, it wasn't built around chatbots or image generators. Its mission was broad: pursue artificial general intelligence safely for the benefit of humanity. Before GPT became their flagship, OpenAI ran early robotics experiments, including a famous project involving a robot hand that could solve a Rubik's Cube from scratch. That project was shut down in 2020 so the company could redirect everything toward what eventually became ChatGPT. Now, with GPT-5 widely regarded as only a marginal improvement over GPT-4, not the revolutionary leap investors were expecting, Altman appears to need a new story. But there are serious reasons to question whether OpenAI can actually deliver on this robotics ambition. Brett Adcock is the CEO of Figure Robotics, a humanoid robot startup that previously partnered directly with OpenAI. In a recent podcast interview, he was strikingly candid about how that relationship actually went. He described the OpenAI team as effectively worthless to Figure's real engineering work. His internal team, he said, ran circles around them. He grew increasingly concerned that the OpenAI researchers were there primarily to learn Figure's proprietary techniques, with every intention of replicating them internally. Eventually, he fired the OpenAI team. "We're basically teaching you how to do this," he said. And that's over. OpenAI's robotics pivot may produce impressive press releases. Whether it produces anything that works is a completely different question. Now, here's where things get genuinely strange. In April 2026, OpenAI announced a $122 billion funding round. The headline was staggering. Amazon committed up to $50 billion. Nvidia, $30 billion. SoftBank, another $30 billion. But look at who those investors actually are. Amazon needs AI demand to justify the cloud infrastructure it has been building for years. Nvidia needs AI demand to sell the GPUs it manufactures. SoftBank has made such enormous public bets on the AI narrative that it cannot afford for that narrative to collapse. These are not neutral outside investors betting on OpenAI's future. These are companies with enormous financial incentives to keep the AI spending story alive. And genuine outside investor appetite? A very different picture. Bloomberg reported that private OpenAI shares being offered on secondary markets were sometimes finding no buyers at all. Meanwhile, investors were actively seeking Anthropic exposure instead. One venture capital founder told Bloomberg, "We literally couldn't find anyone in our pool of 100 institutional investors to take these OpenAI shares. Buyers have indicated they have $2 billion of cash ready to deploy into Anthropic." OpenAI crossed $20 billion in annual revenue in 2025. Impressive by any measure. But its total projected cash burn remains deeply negative. Some estimates suggest the company may exhaust its capital as early as 2027, potentially burning through $500 billion before reaching profitability in 2030. Given all of that context, the financial pressure, the failed products, the looming IPO, OpenAI's very first purchase after securing the $122 billion funding round raised eyebrows across the entire industry. They bought a podcast, not a research lab, not a GPU manufacturer, not a robotics company. Podcast. The show is called TBPN, a daily live program about technology and business that launched in late 2024. Its guest list includes Mark Zuckerberg, Satya Nadella, and Mark Cuban. Its audience is composed primarily of founders, executives, and institutional investors. Its subscriber base sits at roughly 98,000 on YouTube and 401,000 on X. The purchase price was not officially confirmed. Reporting from the Financial Times suggested it fell in the low hundreds of millions of dollars. When Axios directly asked Altman whether that figure was accurate, his response was notably conspicuously evasive. The strategic logic, in isolation, is not entirely unreasonable. In December 2025, the New York Stock Exchange announced a formal partnership with TBPN. OpenAI is targeting an IPO later this year. Chapter 5. The Leadership Crisis. Behind all of this strategic turbulence, the failed app, the pivot to robotics, the podcast acquisition, the IPO pressure, there is a leadership crisis that the most powerful people in AI are no longer willing to stay quiet about. OpenAI's own CFO reportedly expressed serious doubts about the company's $600 billion in publicly announced spending commitments. She questioned openly whether OpenAI was ready for a public offering this year. She acknowledged that the company lacked sufficient computing capacity and spent a significant portion of her time scrambling to source last-minute GPU access. Her reward for that honesty? She was reportedly barred by Altman from attending financial meetings with investors. Investors described her absence in those meetings as noticeable and awkward. Then, in early April 2026, The New Yorker published an investigation 18 months in the making. Written by Ronan Farrow, the journalist who broke the Harvey Weinstein story. It was based on private emails, internal memos, and interviews with current and former OpenAI insiders. The portrait that emerged was devastating. Multiple sources described Altman as fundamentally untrustworthy. A board member described him as having, in their own words, a sociopathic lack of concern for the consequences that may come from deceiving someone. Internal communications showed a consistent, documented pattern of deception. Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, one of the most respected voices in Silicon Valley, and one of Altman's most significant early mentors, reportedly told colleagues that Altman had been lying to them all the time prior to his departure from Y Combinator. Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, while still publicly supportive, has privately criticized what he describes as OpenAI's lack of business discipline. These are not attacks from competitors. They are not disgruntled former employees with axes to grind. These are board members, mentors, major investors, the people who built Sam Altman up, funded his vision, and vouched for him publicly. They are now, in private, saying something very different. And yet, the clock keeps ticking. The IPO approaches. The spending continues. Something is going to give. The only question is what and when. Sora's failure doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a symptom. Something is shifting across the entire AI industry, and the signals are everywhere if you know where to look. Public interest in AI-related searches has peaked and is declining. That's the kind of data that makes investors nervous, because consumer curiosity is supposed to be a leading indicator of where money flows next. There's a framework that technology analysts use called the Gartner hype cycle. Every major new technology follows a predictable arc. First, the discovery, early excitement as the technology appears. Then the peak of inflated expectations, the moment when the hype reaches maximum height and everyone believes the technology will change everything, immediately. Then the crash, the trough of disillusionment, when reality sets in and the gap between promise and delivery becomes impossible to ignore. What comes next? Every decision OpenAI has made in the months since Sora's shutdown points in the same direction. The AGI development rebrand, the enterprise push, the podcast acquisition, the robotics pivot, the $122 billion funding round assembled from strategically aligned investors. The raw facts are impossible to dismiss. 900 million weekly users. More money raised than the GDP of many countries. The most recognized brand in artificial intelligence on the planet. But also, one of the least trusted leadership teams in its space. Costs that burn faster than revenue can grow. A flagship product, GPT-5, that disappointed expectations. A board that reportedly contains people who don't fully trust the person running the company. And a history of bold promises, from Sora to robotics, that have struggled to survive contact with reality. The most important thing Sora taught us isn't about video generation, or copyright law, or retention metrics. Maybe the most important thing Sora taught us is this: you cannot build the future on attention alone. At some point, the product has to be real. The numbers have to work. The people at the top have to mean what they say. At some point, the cameras turn off, and all that's left is whether any of it was actually true. If this video made you think, drop a comment with one word that describes how you feel about where AI is heading right now. Subscribe because a lot of similar things are on the way.